Okay. Okay, so we're getting started with that, and I'm going to stop the share just so we have a few seconds of that, and just tell you a little bit about. I'm Scott Lewis. I'm in Pembroke Pines here in Southeast Florida, and glad you're joining us tonight with this Florida Climate Educators Network, and we've had this group going for a number of months now, and supporting teachers as they venture into the area of doing climate change education. So we try to do a variety of different kinds of speakers, and we're glad that Megan is joining us tonight. Megan was actually joined us with a different hat on in November. And actually, that was a very nice presentation that she did. She's an assistant curator of museum education at University of Florida in Gainesville. And, you know, with that hat on, she's got a lot of interest in how people learn in museums, and was kind of that informal education perspective. And we were intrigued enough by what she was talking about with the Thompson Earth Systems Institute to say, well, that's a different hat that she's wearing, and maybe we'll get some formal educators on who, are interested in having these science types in the school to talk with their students, and what that means and how that's different, maybe a little different. So we're excited that Megan's joining us. As some of you, well, I guess neither one of you were on the last call, but she's got a background in marine sciences, and she's joining us. She got her science ed degree at North Carolina State, and she's particularly focused on how people learn in an informal education setting. And the presentation she gave in November was sort of focused on strategies that might be used to help learn climate change better. And tonight she's going to talk about some different projects. Well, we'll start with the Thompson Earth Sciences Institute. And Megan, you can add anything else you'd like about your own background here. And I'm gonna mute myself, and hopefully you'll do about a 15 or 20-minute presentation, or it could be longer. And we got a small group here tonight, but maybe if people have questions along the way, maybe you wanna recognize them, or they can indicate it with that little hand icon or something, and they can ask you along the way. And then if you want to do some brainstorming at the end about particular applications of the kind of things that she'll be talking about tonight, that would be great. So I'm going to mute myself, and Megan, why don't you go ahead?
Wonderful. Thank you again, Scott, for having me. As Scott mentioned, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Florida, and I'm also the director of the Thompson Earth Systems Institute. And tonight I'm going to share with you some of the ways that our institute can help support climate change education in Florida. So just to share a little bit about the Thompson Earth Systems Institute, our mission is to help educate and communicate about Earth system science, so land, air, water, and life, and how humans interact with all of those systems. And we share that research in a way that helps Floridians to be more effective stewards of our planet. And we do this through a number of ways. And tonight I'm going to share some of the ways that we can help you teach climate change here in the state of Florida. So one of our biggest programs that we offer is called The Scientist in Every Florida School. And this program is really quite exciting because teachers come to us and they request an opportunity to have a scientist come into their classroom. And it is a free program where K-12 public school students and teachers are introduced to cutting edge research by providing either science role models or hands-on experiences to, again, help inspire our future stewards of the planet. And we do this through virtual and in-person classroom interactions with a scientist. And we really work with the scientists and the teachers to help target specific standards, to create lessons, labs, activities, projects with scientists. And we have really wonderful professional development opportunities, both in the field and in the lab with scientists. Angeli mentioned earlier that she's part of our AI shark cohort. And so we are currently accepting applications for our next summer's worth of workshops. There will be one on using shark's teeth to teach machine learning, which Angeli's in. We are going to have a really exciting one for elementary teachers on how to use collections to teach the nature of science in the elementary classroom, and it'll all be based on our fish collection. So you get to come work in our collection at the museum, and we have a plant pathology for high school. And plant pathology and even the fish one could easily be tied into climate change. But one of the ways that we help teachers teach about climate change is they come to us and say, this is the standard that I need help with. And we have a huge, just giant Rolodex of scientists who work in this space. And we partner with our teachers to identify what it is that they're trying to talk about. And we contact our scientists and say, hey, we have someone in South Florida who would like to talk about sunny day flooding in Miami. And can you put a presentation together? So this is a presentation one of our scientists did for a classroom talking about why those of us who live in Florida care about what's going on in the polar areas and polar regions of our country, or the planet rather. So we really, this is bottom up from teachers to us to ask for support and requests, help. And we, Angeli, have you mentioned that you've had some folks come to your classroom? Do you want to share a little bit about what that experience was like?
Yes, I would love to. So in life science, with all the things that I'm teaching, but being a part of the Shark AI, I really wanted to focus on having someone who was in the realm of sharks or rays, so that we could have a learning opportunity that encompassed sharks. And it was actually during my genetics unit. I was blessed that I had a scientist travel from UF and come and stay the entire day with me to really expose and engage those students. His name was Joe Miguez, and he works for the museum in the Naylor lab. And he works in genetics on rays, and he brought some specimen from the museum. So the kids actually had an opportunity to have touch tiger shark jaws, and they were able to see a sawfish rostrum. And he had prepared the skull of a hammerhead, and so they actually got to see what it looked like with a jaw still attached with that cartilage. And just having the opportunity to have him in class and talking about genetics and teaching something that I introduced to my students, like phenotype and genotype, and practicing Punnett squares. It was really neat for them to have a scientist, no longer me. I'm not the cool one in the classroom, right? I'm the teacher. So you bring in a scientist and the kids are just ooh and ah, and they're really super engaged. And that's one, what I was hoping for, and two, it exceeded all of my expectations. And again, I was just so thankful that there was someone who was willing to drive those 2.5, 3 hours, and they had a friend staying in who lives in Sarasota. So they actually stayed with that friend. And it worked out that they honestly loved teaching the kids as well. So that was their first experience as a SEPS scientist, and it was my first experience as a SEPS teacher. So we kind of navigated everything together, but as long as there's great communication between the scientist and the teacher, things will run smoothly. But if there's not communication, I feel like there could probably be some challenges.
Yes, and we work very hard to make sure that we can address a lot of those challenges that come with trying to organize a scientist-teacher partnership. So in our institute, we actually do research on what makes effective scientist-teacher partnerships. And we had a publication come out earlier this year on what we know about effective scientist-teacher partnerships. And we know a lot of scientists struggle to participate in these programs because they don't know how to find teachers, and they don't have the time for the organization. And so our team actually works with you to help identify, to make sure that we assist with the scheduling and the timing. And most of our visits these days are virtual, so we can bring in scientists from all over the state to your classroom, and we can target those standards that you're trying to teach. The two coordinators for our program are both former teachers, and so they are very familiar with the classroom. We as a team are very aware of the challenges that come with bringing visitors into the classroom. So we have plans in place to help you work with your administration to get approval to have us come visit to your classroom. And so we are excited to work with teachers to make sure that this is a very smooth process and that everyone has the opportunity to be successful. And we frequently work with our scientists to make sure that how they engage with the students is age appropriate and making sure that we are really meeting those standards that you're hoping to. So that is a very super brief introduction to scientists in every Florida schools. And, we do everything besides climate change, but for tonight, I was really just focusing on the fact that we can help with those standards. And we have folks that work in the Arctic that are studying ice melt in Greenland that are part of our organization. We have folks who study paleoclimate. So how do we know that the climate has changed in the past, or what does that look like in Florida? And so we have a whole range of folks that can help to bring this content into your classroom. And just to let you know how to find us, this is Victor. He's part of our Shark AI program. I'm not going to read all of these, but we have a whole bunch of websites. If you go to the very first one, that's how you can request a scientist. You can sign up for a teacher newsletter and find out what kinds of professional development we have going on, other opportunities and resources. We have a great website, a YouTube channel with a whole bunch of videos, and a Facebook group where you connect with other teachers across the state and ask for questions and support. And these are our two wonderful coordinators, Brian and Stephanie. And so you can either request a scientist through that bit.ly link right there, or you can reach out to Brian or Stephanie, and those are their emails. So that is a really quick run through of our formal K-12 public school programming. Anjali, did I miss anything important that folks should know about this program?
All I was going to add was Brian and Stephanie do an excellent job at getting you in the right direction with scientists, and they make it really easy. And I was apprehensive at first, and I had a lot of questions, and Stephanie really helped me kind of clear through those questions and get on the other side of the cloud that I was in. And I felt more confident after speaking with both of them to determine, how do I want to have a scientist in my room? What do I want to talk about? What are some challenges that I might face? And it was so helpful to have a person to talk to and ask, and then work through the red tape for my own county, because I think every county will be different. Virtual versus in-person visits also will be different. So that is another layer. Me having an in-person visit, I had more that I had to take care of, and Stephanie was incredibly helpful with that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Anjali. I really appreciate you sharing your experience with this. This is one thing for me as the director to say, hey, this is an amazing experience and opportunity. So it's, as a side note to those of you watching the recording, Anjali did not know that I was going to ask her any of these questions. So she's not a plant, I promise. Marina, did you have any questions about this particular program before I move on to our programming that's more for formal and informal folks?
Yes, so this program is only offered for public schools?
Yes, public K-12 schools in Florida.
Okay, yeah. We try to connect students with scientists and folks working in the field of whatever they're doing their projects on. So I think this will be really helpful resource to pass along to the teachers we work with. So thank you.
Great, our pleasure.
You mind if I ask a couple questions here? I'm curious, Angela, how did you, what made you get in the program in the first place? And you mentioned some challenges that you were anticipating perhaps with the scientists. I'm just curious about that.
I was introduced to the program because I am a University of Florida graduate and I have followed the Florida Museum for a long time. And so having that in my email, also through Facebook, it pops up. I've also been following the Scientists in Every Florida School website since its creation on Facebook. And I think that was 2020. Am I right, Megan? Yeah. It was actually suggested to me from a friend of mine who works over at Rollins, who knew Stephanie, who is one of the people that helps out, or a team member with SEFs. The challenges that I was concerned about was, what level is that scientist going to speak to my students, right? I teach 7th grade students, but a lot of my students are lower level. They're not advanced students. I have students who read anywhere between a 1st grade level and a 9th grade level. So some of my challenges were, when they present this information, are my kids going to understand what they're doing? So he created his PowerPoint presentation, and then he and I sat multiple times through Zoom and looked over his PowerPoint. We would change this, we would discuss that. If he used a word that I was like, my students are just not going to get that. And it's not a word that I need for them to work on for vocabulary, or is a word that they're going to see in their 7th grade science course, or even 9th grade biology, 10th grade biology. I kind of asked him, hey, can we change this? And he was completely open to it. And I was incredibly thankful for that. So he sent over his PowerPoint to me, and I made guided skeleton notes for my students. So we really collaborated, and the kids were able to not only be fully engaged to what he was saying, but then stop, fill in their notes, whatever vocabulary term, whatever definition. And then they had Punnett squares that they had to work on with him in the class as well. So I had the challenges that I would assume I might face, even in my own planning, with how different levels my students were. But with the communication with Mr. Miguez, everything worked out great.
All right, nice. Thank you for giving some great details there on that.
No,
Megan,
you're welcome.
I wonder, I mean, that's amazing that the scientists were open to making those changes and working in a collaborative way with the teacher there. Is that's something you look for when you do work with the selective scientists, I assume?
Yes, and as I mentioned, we feel very strongly that this is like co-developed and bottom up, because very frequently in programs we see a scientist say, hey, I made this thing here, use this in your classroom, and it just doesn't fit for what a teacher is trying to do or needs to cover. And actually, Brian and I just published with one of our scientists an article in Connected Science Learning, which is the National Science Teaching Association journal, in January, about one of our scientist teacher partnerships and how they worked together to co-develop. And we interviewed the teachers, we interviewed the scientists to really dig into what worked well and what didn't work well, and how could we continue to improve the program. And that came out in the January issue of Connected Science Learning, if anybody wants to take a peek and see what we found. Yeah, okay, I'll send it along, but I think it is open access also, but I'll find the link and make sure that we share it with you all. Wonderful. Well, just to be kind with everybody's time, I'm going to jump into our next set of programming that we offer. And Angeli just took a training on this with me in February. She had no idea that I was going to be talking about all the things she was familiar with today. So we have a great new curriculum to help educators engage their students in civic action for the environment. And one of the first questions we ask everybody is, what is your ideal community? So for those of you who are on the call, when you think of what your ideal community would look like, what kinds of things come to mind?
Walkability, bikeability. Yeah, those are big for me. Green spaces.
Green space is huge for me.
Opportunities for getting students, or not students, but families outdoors, really making those connections so that people can build a trust within their community. So they realize that they all work together to make that community thrive.
Scott, what would be in your ideal community?
Well, I like that last comment very much. I could, we don't see people in the picture, so we have to think about that. So I think, yeah, both, maybe a diversity of different people and ages and that sort of thing. But also I like the idea, I mean, the nature setting is beautiful, which is really great. And I think ways that some of that, we're talking about climate change and stuff, so maybe solar energy or some kind of wind energy or production where people sort of can cut down food miles, maybe some garden production for food, people growing some of their own kinds of things. That's that, and opportunities. Yeah, I like this shared space here with a group of houses so people can go out and work together. That's great.
Yeah, and so we tend to start the workshop about our civic action projects with this question. And one of the interesting things to think about is how your students would answer that question, and would they answer it the same way? And so we had a discussion at our workshop in February where somebody was talking about having shared community space, and their student said that they thought their students would want like a skate park, but that is also a community space. So even if we don't call it the same thing, we likely all have very similar types of communities that we would love to see and share. And so this curriculum that I'm sharing is to help our students learn how they can start to move their community towards that ideal. So we have this program called Community Action Projects for the Environment, and I'm going to share the link to the whole curriculum, so it'll be freely available for anybody who wants to use it. And it helps groups of youth ages 11 to 18 identify and explore an environmental issue in their own community. And then they develop and implement a community project that results in them asking a decision maker to make a change that benefits their whole community. And we began this in a partnership with 4-H. But it was funded by the US EPA through the EE 360 Plus program at NAAEE. And it's based on the Earth Force model. So I'm sure some of our formal classroom teachers are familiar with Earth Force. It is a curriculum with about 36 different activities. And we worked with other educators to distill those 30 some activities down into 8 modules. So that way it can be done in a shorter time period. And this was developed, tested, and revised at the University of Florida in our School of Forestry, Fisheries, and Geomatic Sciences. So a quick overview of what we do in this curriculum. You can see in the first bubble that we get them thinking about a community issue that they really care about. But if you notice, they don't start thinking about projects or processes until meeting 4. And that's one of the things our students struggle with is they think of an issue. Okay, so our pollinators are disappearing, and they immediately want to jump into a solution such as build a pollinator garden. And that's a bit different with this project than other projects, is rather than doing a one-time service project, they have to work together to figure out what are the root causes. Why are we actually losing our pollinators? And yes, habitat is part of the problem, but maybe at our school, the issue is actually pesticides and herbicides, which are keeping our pollinators from being able to be here. And maybe we would learn that when our guest speakers come to visit and when we start actually mapping the issue to figure out what the root causes are. And at that point, we realize, okay, well, then we need to figure out how to talk to the principal or facilities to get them to change the way they are treating our property, so that way we can help protect our pollinators. And so this is an 8-meeting process that takes them from coming up with an idea, really digging down and learning more about how it is working in their community, all the way through making an ask with someone, and then making sure we do a press release and some sort of celebration, because even if the students don't get a response, which is quite possible, we want to celebrate the work and the energy and critical thinking that goes into this process. So each of these 8 modules is made up of an icebreaker, 1 to 3 activities to build skills and support the process. Almost all of them have worksheets or videos. They come with a reflection page to help scaffold the students through the whole process. And then we have a mission to bridge to the next meeting, which was originally called homework. But since we were working in out of school spaces, people didn't want homework. So it's now called a mission. And we do have all of the materials that you would need to have the slide presentations. We have printable copies of the worksheets, digital fillable versions of the worksheets, all sorts of great things that can help. And what we have found is that this can be a little bit challenging for students, because again, they want to leap straight into doing an activity. And there are great ways to use that activity to collect data to then be able to make the ask. Because in our research with the students who participated in our first year, we found students who did a project rather than making a request saw gains in their feelings of their community within their group. So they felt they could work together better teamwork. They liked one another better, but we really didn't see an increase in their civic engagement skills, that they didn't see themselves as being able to make change in their community any more than they had previously. But those students who actually went and talked to someone and made a request for change, they saw gains in their beliefs about their ability to engage civically in their community. So the question I had for folks tonight was, how can we apply a curriculum like this where we have students engaging in civic action and thinking about changes they want to make in their community? How could we use this type of curriculum to think about climate change with our students?
I think that we'd be able to utilize this. And now in 7th grade, we don't talk too much regarding climate change. I'm currently in my ecosystems unit, and we do discuss some factors that affect ecosystems. So when working through a climate change education, might be able to introduce certain things that are already in place as, what do you guys think? Almost like debates to kind of get them thinking of, how could you change what is being taught now versus what could be, and kind of get them thinking along those lines as an action. And maybe that is something that they could move forward with to the school board, so that generations behind them have more access to climate change education. Here in Sarasota County, we have a little bit of a red color for our county. So we do get a lot of pushback when we're discussing climate change education. So showing it to students in that debate of, here's evidence, here's what we have, what could you do? I think would be a great way to also introduce like the civic action. How could you change things moving forward? Instead of it just being us, the adults, it's their education and it's their state, right? When we're gone. So.
And thank you, Angeli. That's a really important point that I didn't make yet, is that this is intended to be student driven, that the students come up with the issue, they come up with the project, they lead the entire process, which I know can be difficult for teachers, because you don't always have time or the latitude to be able to do those sorts of things. So it is easy to bound this project by saying we're thinking about issues on our campus. And so one thing that frequently comes up related to climate change in these activities is thinking about excess carbon dioxide production. And so one of the things we end up talking about is, could students work on a project where they make the drop-off zone at school a no idle zone? Now, we know that would never happen in Florida because everyone would asphyxiate in their cars, but that's one of the examples that we give, is that, or if there's too much pavement on the campus causing heat island effects, what can we do as a class to try to get that to change? So I think there are ways that students will likely end up talking about issues related to climate change, and that can be as overt or not as your school allows.
Yeah, I really love the CAPE program. I've only looked at it a little bit. I also volunteer with 4-H with the Youth Naturalist curriculum. And we're running actually the Climate Innovation Challenge with 4-H in the fall, which is great. So I love that. I love 4-H. And I guess how we work, so our program is really similar, the Climate Innovation Challenge, in that it's student led and we ask student to come up with, it's like solution driven. And we kind of talk about like, what is your entry point? And that's the same way that we can apply things to climate change. And we found that, there's not really much that you can't tie into climate change in some way. And so if you really dig down and get curious with the kids, they'll come up with some really interesting ideas. Someone could be like, well, all I want to do is sleep. And you're like, okay, well, what is the air quality like where you are? And how is that affecting your sleep? And that can come up, kids can come up with some really innovative things. So yeah, I think that any sort of, any issue can almost be tied to climate change in the environment we're in now because it affects almost every aspect of our life.
That's a great point.
Marina and Megan, how do you foreground this so that you have that initial conversations about identifying an area or an issue that they might then go from there?
Well, we do a lot of like mind mapping and brainstorming sessions with the kids. Just kind of, mostly a lot of mind mapping and brainstorming.
Yeah, and in this curriculum, I kind of skipped over what is in each of the modules, but the first one starts by thinking about what is that ideal community and what are we hoping to have. There's an activity where they think of 5 environmental issues in their community. So they come up with a list as a group. And then the first one on the bottom here is called root causes. So it's a fun little worksheet shaped like a tree where they put their environmental issue in the middle and they put all of the effects and the impacts of that environmental issue up into the leaves. And then down in the roots, they have to talk about what are the root causes that are causing that issue. And what we often find is those root causes are not actually the root cause. And we have to keep asking them, okay, but what causes that? So we frequently have students put global climate change in the middle, and we can't pick an actionable task if we start at the global climate change level. So then if they say excess carbon dioxide production, then as one of the root causes, we say, okay, but what causes that? And they may say driving too many cars. Okay, and what causes that? And maybe it's lack of public transit or things like that. And we keep drilling down until we get to something that's actionable at the student group level, where we can then figure out who is the community that's impacted by this, who are the people that are the decision makers, and how do we figure out who our partners are who may help us to solve this issue. And that takes place over about 4 meetings. Awesome. So this is our website. So the curriculum is completely free and available online. And we have both a 4-H version, Marina, as well as a non-4-H version. It has examples of what our groups have done. Oh, and we actually just found out this morning that the curriculum won a gold award at the ANREP meeting this year, which is an extension profession conference. And so they were very excited about the curriculum. So we are happy to celebrate that we won an award today. And it gives examples again of what some of our other groups have done. There's a 5-module self-guided training that you can take, and there's a short 3-question quiz at the end of each one. And if you take them all, you get a certificate saying you're a CAPE certified facilitator. There are all the free resources to download, including pre-post surveys. So if you want to see how your students change over time, and it includes some interesting questions because they're action-based. So practical questions, not just, do you think you did a good job? It's more of a, here's a scenario, who might be the decision maker that you need to talk to and why? And we have a rubric that we use to grade those because there's no one right or wrong answer. And this is a Canvas site. So once you log in, the second time you come back, it's hard to figure out where to go. So when you log in again, click on your name and go to student dashboard. I was terrified I had accidentally deleted everything the first time. It's the second time I logged in because there was nothing there. But we have a lot of resources up there. And we're continuing to offer workshops, and we have meetings that folks can attend, and we're just really trying to help support educators as they are engaging their students in civic action. So, do you all have any questions? This is our Thompson Earth Systems website and my email if folks have questions that they'd like to reach out afterwards once they've seen this presentation. But yeah, we're just excited to help support teachers as best we can.
Are you going to be doing some research on that program, and
Yes.
what questions will you be asking?
So in our first cohort, we actually did a study to see how the students changed over time. And that's why I mentioned that students who actually make the ask see a greater increase in their skills and their ability to answer the scenario problems. Whereas the students who made a video or wrote a letter, maybe not the letter, but wrote a video, made a video and did a project rather than making an ask, those students really only saw an increase in their positive youth development and their beliefs that they can work with one another. And so the challenges that we found in the evaluation were really project specific. So that was good to see that there wasn't major flaws in the curriculum itself. And there were a couple other questions. I just gave a whole research presentation on this last week. So we are continuing to do studies on this. And this year I'm doing research on how do our educators feel about using this curriculum so that we can see how it is working in different situations.
Who are you seeing reach out for resources on climate education? Like, is there like specific age, like grades you're seeing more folks, or counties?
That is a great question. And I wish Brian or Stephanie were here today because they could tell you more about what teachers and how many are requesting from that age group. I have a tendency to do a lot of public engagement, regardless of whether people want it or not. So they're getting a lot of climate information from me. For example, I participated in the Volo Climate Week earlier this year, or last year, I guess now at this point. And I do a lot of climate change communication trainings and things of that nature. So we embed it into a lot of our programming for grad students and undergrads here at the University of Florida. And I'm sure we have a list of how many teachers are requesting and for what grades, but I don't have access to that information. Or I probably do, but I wouldn't know how to find it right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious as, you know, I have a parent, or I'm a parent of a kid in the public school system, and, you know, and I'm obviously concerned with the lack of climate education. And so I'm curious how many teachers are really like looking for these resources. And, you know, if that's something that the teachers are really looking for and they're not, you know, finding it, or if they're, I don't know, nervous to implement climate change education, and how you could help combat that kind of those nervousness around that, especially, you know, I'm in Leon County, which is a blue county, but, you know, in these maybe more rural counties, places where there's more political pushback.
Yeah, and that is something we've been running into. So the paper we just published on our scientist teacher partnership, she was talking about sharks, but one of the counties she was presenting in asked for her presentation a month in advance to make sure it didn't have anything about evolution or climate change in it. So we are seeing very different needs and possibilities in different counties. So we are doing our best to serve the teachers as we can, where we can. And we're just in a very interesting climate right now.
I will say though, if it is in the standards of the class that is being taught, it is a requirement by the teacher to be implementing those standards and teaching those standards. And they're still currently a part of environmental education in the state of Florida. It's still a part of the biology courses. Evolution is still a part of 7th grade life science standards. So until it is removed, technically we have to teach it. So there's that.
Yeah, and I think it was more just having a guest in the classroom teaching that versus the teacher teaching it. So, you know, we want to support teachers, not make their lives more complicated. So we defer to what our partners feel they can do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, what you're saying there, but it's amazing to me that evolution is still a question in the state of Florida. But it's really amazing. But I feel your pain in Sarasota. I understand I've been reading over the last couple of years, some of the interesting challenges that the school district has been going there and through with the boards and things. So feel free to join us, Angela, with our FCEN group here. That's we're trying to support some of this stuff. But well, great. Well, Megan, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. We're going to try to get this out to more people and provide the link to our membership and folks have some other networks that they want to distribute that link to after we get it up online. That would be great, and hope more people learn about these programs through what
So
you're
I'm sorry it
doing.
was a lot of shameless promotion, but really these are all free resources that we want to offer teachers to help make your job easier and to connect real science to the classroom. Not that you aren't doing real science, but like ongoing current research that it's happening.
Right. Well, thank you very much again. I'm going to share one screen before we go, if I can get that up there. Here's another familiar face here.
Oh.
You can see this is the next month. We seem to be pulling a lot of Gainesville people into this presentations, but we're going to have Martha Monroe next month. She's I guess she's been involved in these guideline production for educators on climate action and justice. So she's agreed to give a little presentation on that for our next meeting on April 30th. So anyone, we'll get that information to you after this meeting as well. So you'll be on get that forwarded out there. That should be interesting as well. So I'll just stop that. Once again, thank you. Any final words, Megan?
Just don't hesitate to reach out if there's any way we can help support you.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. I'm going to stop recording now.